73-year-old Harold and 69-year-old Margaret Thompson were returning home from their weekly grocery shopping when three MMA fighters cornered them in the parking lot of Miller's Market, demanding the elderly couple's wedding rings, prescription medications, and the $40 Harold had just withdrawn from the ATM. The retired high school teacher and his wife of 51 years had never faced violence before, but these men, each weighing over 200 pounds and trained in combat sports, seemed prepared to use whatever force necessary to take what they wanted. "Please, we'll give you whatever you want," Harold pleaded, as he tried to position himself protectively in front of Margaret, who was clutching her purse with trembling hands. "Just don't hurt my wife." That's when the thunder started. 26 members of the Brotherhood Guard MC were returning from a charity ride for veterans when they witnessed what was clearly an assault in progress. These leather-clad protectors, led by former Navy SEAL Commander Marcus Steele Rodriguez, were about to demonstrate that real warriors don't pick fights with defenseless people. They protect them from those who do. The mainstream media would report the incident as a random confrontation, but they would ignore the deeper story of how 26 strangers became family to two elderly people who had nowhere else to turn. Would you like to join us for this incredible journey? Subscribe to our channel now so you don't miss what happens next. The Brotherhood Guard Motorcycle Club had been riding the highways of Texas for over 14 years, their membership consisting entirely of military veterans who had found brotherhood and purpose through their shared commitment to protecting civilians who couldn't protect themselves. What had started as informal gatherings among former Special Operations soldiers had evolved into the most respected veteran organization in the Southwest. Commander Marcus Steele Rodriguez, the 52-year-old former Navy SEAL who led the Brotherhood Guard, was concluding their monthly charity ride to raise funds for disabled veterans when his combat-trained instincts detected something that made every protective alarm in his system activate. The scene unfolding in Miller's Market parking lot was unmistakable to someone who had spent 2 decades identifying and neutralizing threats to innocent people. "All units, emergency response," Steele commanded through his helmet radio to the 25 riders behind him. "Civilian assault in progress, multiple aggressors, elderly victims. This is what we trained for, brothers." The response was immediate and overwhelming. 26 motorcycles began converging on the parking lot with tactical precision, their engines creating a mechanical thunder that announced the arrival of men who had spent their careers protecting the innocent from those who would harm them. Captain Derek "Tank" Williams, a former Army Ranger who served as the Brotherhood Guard's tactical coordinator, was first to assess the situation through his military-grade optics. 3 male suspects, approximately 25 to 30 years old, physically fit, aggressive posture toward 2 elderly civilians, he radioed back to Steele. Suspects appear to be trained fighters based on movement and stance. Through his binoculars, Tank could see Harold Thompson attempting to shield his wife while 3 much younger, stronger men closed in around them like predators who had cornered helpless prey. The size and age disparity made this the kind of cowardly attack that disgusted every veteran who had sworn to protect the defenseless. "Jesus Christ," whispered Master Sergeant Rick "Doc" Anderson, a former Green Beret medic whose medical training allowed him to recognize the kind of physical damage that trained fighters could inflict on frail elderly victims. "Those aren't just punks. Those are MMA fighters. Look at the muscle development, the stance, the confident aggression. They could kill those old folks with their bare hands." Steele felt his SEAL training engage as he processed the tactical assessment combined with the moral imperative they were facing. 3 trained fighters attacking elderly civilians represented the kind of predatory behavior that every warrior was honor-bound to stop, regardless of personal risk or legal complications. "All units, standard protective intervention," Steele ordered, his Navy SEAL training automatically engaging as he shifted into combat mode. "Priority 1 is civilian extraction. Priority 2 is suspect neutralization. We engage with overwhelming force and absolute commitment to protecting innocent life." If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you are listening to in the comments. The 26 Brotherhood Guard members who responded to Miller's Market that afternoon represented the most elite military training available to American forces. Former Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Green Berets, Marine Force Recon, and Air Force pararescue specialists, all united by their commitment to protecting people who had no other defense against predators. The three MMA fighters who were threatening the Thompsons had no idea what they were about to face. Jake Morrison, Tommy Cruz, and Brad Stevens were local gym bullies who had been using their fighting skills to intimidate and rob elderly targets throughout the area, confident that their victims would be too frightened and frail to resist. Morrison, the 28-year-old ringleader who competed in regional MMA tournaments, had developed a pattern of targeting senior citizens outside grocery stores and pharmacies where they were likely to be carrying cash and prescription medications that could be sold on the street. "Come on, old man, make this easy on yourself," Morrison sneered as he grabbed Harold's shoulder with enough force to nearly knock the elderly teacher off balance. "Give us the rings, the pills, and whatever cash you've got, or this gets a lot worse for both of you." Margaret Thompson whimpered as Cruz moved to flank her, his intimidating presence and aggressive posture making it clear that resistance would result in serious injury or worse. The 69-year-old retired nurse had never experienced violence in her life, and the reality of facing trained killers was overwhelming. "Please don't hurt us," she whispered, her voice shaking with terror as she fumbled to remove her wedding ring with arthritis-stiffened fingers. "We're not trying to cause trouble." That's when the first motorcycle appeared at the parking lot entrance, followed by another, then another, until 26 Harley-Davidsons were forming a tactical perimeter around the assault in progress. The sound of their engines created a mechanical warning that trained fighters should have recognized as the approach of superior force. Morrison looked up from his victims to see a wall of leather-clad bikers dismounting their motorcycles with military precision, their movements coordinated and purposeful in ways that suggested extensive tactical training. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, his confidence wavering as he realized that the situation had suddenly become much more complicated. Steele Rodriguez dismounted his Harley and walked toward the confrontation with the calm authority of someone who had faced much more dangerous enemies in much more challenging circumstances. His SEAL training had taught him to project lethal capability while maintaining tactical control of volatile situations. "Gentlemen, you appear to be harassing elderly civilians," Steele announced in the command voice that had controlled dangerous situations in hostile territories around the world. "I suggest you step away from them immediately. If you've watched this far, say in the comments, what secret do you keep?" Morrison attempted to maintain his aggressive posture, but his MMA training hadn't prepared him for facing former Special Operations soldiers who had spent their careers in life-or-death combat situations. "Mind your own business, old man. This doesn't concern you." "Actually, protecting innocent civilians is exactly our business," replied Tank Williams as he positioned himself beside Steele, his Army Ranger training automatically engaging tactical protocols for neutralizing multiple threats. "These people are now under our protection." The confrontation that followed would be discussed in veteran circles for years to come. Three young men who had used their fighting skills to terrorize defenseless victims suddenly found themselves facing 26 combat veterans whose training exceeded anything they had ever encountered. Doc Anderson moved directly to Harold and Margaret Thompson, his Green Beret medical training, combining with paternal instincts as he assessed their condition and provided immediate protective presence. "Sir, ma'am, you're safe now," he said in the gentle voice he used with civilian trauma victims. "These men are going to leave you alone." "Who are you people?" Harold asked, his voice shaking with relief and confusion as he realized that help had arrived from an unexpected source. "We're veterans, sir," Doc replied with quiet pride. "We heard you needed assistance." The tactical situation was rapidly deteriorating for the MMA fighters, who found themselves surrounded by men whose military training and protective commitment far exceeded their gymnasium combat experience. Morrison made the critical error of attempting to escalate the confrontation by throwing a punch at Steele Rodriguez. The result was swift and decisive. Steele's SEAL hand-to-hand combat training allowed him to neutralize Morrison's attack and render him unconscious within seconds, using techniques designed for eliminating threats in hostile environments. Morrison collapsed to the pavement without inflicting any damage on his intended target. "2 suspects remaining," Steele announced calmly, as Cruz and Stevens realized that their friend had just been defeated by someone whose fighting skills exceeded anything they had encountered in their MMA careers. Cruz attempted to flee, but was intercepted by Staff Sergeant Mike Hawk Patterson, a former Marine Force recon specialist whose pursuit and apprehension training made escape impossible. Stevens surrendered immediately, understanding that resistance would result in the same fate that had befallen Morrison. If you're enjoying the story, Write from which city you are listening to in the comments. The aftermath of the confrontation revealed the extent of the threat that the Thompsons had been facing. A search of the three suspects revealed weapons, drugs and items stolen from other elderly victims, indicating that this had been an ongoing criminal enterprise rather than a random robbery. These men have been targeting senior citizens throughout the area, reported Sergeant First Class Tony Scout Martinez, a former Army intelligence specialist whose investigative skills had uncovered evidence linking the suspects to multiple unsolved robberies. The Thompsons were just the latest in a series of victims. Local law enforcement arrived within 10 minutes of the initial confrontation, finding a scene that would become legendary in their department. 3 unconscious or subdued suspects surrounded by 26 leather-clad veterans who had executed a perfect civilian protection operation. How did you manage to neutralize 3 trained fighters without anyone getting seriously injured? Asked Detective Lieutenant Sarah Williams of the County Sheriff's Department. Same way we handled hostile combatants overseas, Steele replied simply. Training, teamwork, and absolute commitment to protecting innocent American lives. The 3 MMA fighters were arrested on charges of attempted robbery, assault, elder abuse, and possession of stolen property. The evidence collected at the scene linked them to 17 similar attacks on elderly victims throughout the region, crimes that might never have been solved without the Brotherhood Guard's intervention. Harold and Margaret Thompson were examined by paramedics and found to be physically unharmed, but suffering from severe stress and emotional trauma from their ordeal. Their recovery would require more than medical attention. It would need the kind of support that only people who understood protection and loyalty could provide. How can we thank you? Margaret asked Steele as paramedics completed their examination. You saved our lives. Ma'am, protecting our community includes protecting you, Steele replied with humble pride. No thanks needed, but the Brotherhood Guard's protection of the Thompsons was just beginning. What started as an emergency response would evolve into something deeper, a family relationship that would transform the lives of everyone involved. 6 months after their rescue from the MMA fighters, Harold and Margaret Thompson had discovered that being protected by 26 veterans created responsibilities and opportunities they never could have imagined. The elderly couple had become the unofficial grandparents of the Brotherhood Guard, while the bikers had gained a family that appreciated their protective instincts and honored their service in ways that society often didn't. Steele Rodriguez sat in the Thompsons' living room, reviewing the latest security assessment reports, while the sound of motorcycles arriving for their weekly family dinner echoed from the driveway. The walls were decorated with photos from Brotherhood Guard events, Harold's teaching awards, Margaret's nursing certificates, and military memorabilia that represented the merger of 2 families into something stronger than either had been alone. The perimeter security system is working perfectly, Steele reported to Harold as he studied the latest electronic surveillance data. Motion detectors, camera coverage, and emergency alert systems all tested and functional. Anyone who tries to approach this house with hostile intent will face immediate response. Harold smiled as he watched Brotherhood Guard members setting up tables for their weekly gathering, many of them veterans who had traded their evening leisure time for the opportunity to spend time with surrogate grandparents who appreciated their sacrifice and service. I still can't believe how much our lives have changed since that day in the parking lot. The relationship between the Thompsons and the Brotherhood Guard had evolved far beyond the dramatic rescue that had brought them together. The elderly couple had become the heart of the organization's extended family structure, providing the kind of civilian connection that helped veterans process their transition to peaceful society. Tell me about the scholarship program, Harold requested, noting the detailed application materials spread across Steele's briefcase related to the educational initiative that had been established in the Thompsons' honor. We're now providing full 4-year college scholarships for children of military families throughout Texas, Steele explained enthusiastically. The program combines academic support with mentorship from Brotherhood Guard members who understand both military culture and civilian success. The Harold and Margaret Thompson Veterans Family Scholarship Program represented something unprecedented in veteran community service, combat soldiers using their own resources and networks to create educational opportunities for the children of military families who might otherwise struggle with the financial burden of higher education. If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you are listening to in the comments. Dr. Patricia Rodriguez, A family counselor who had been studying the Thompson Brotherhood Guard relationship for the past year was amazed by its therapeutic effectiveness for both elderly civilians and military veterans. What Harold and Margaret have created with the Brotherhood Guard represents a new model for intergenerational community support, she reported during a presentation to the American Association of Family Therapy. The secret to their success wasn't just the dramatic rescue that had brought them together. It was the Thompsons' genuine appreciation for military service and their understanding that veterans needed civilian connections that honored their sacrifice while helping them find purpose in peacetime activities. Margaret Thompson had become the Brotherhood Guard's unofficial family coordinator, organizing birthday celebrations, holiday gatherings, and memorial services that honored both their military service and their continuing commitment to community protection. Her experience as a retired nurse made her invaluable for providing the kind of caring support that many veterans had been missing since leaving military service. "These men gave their youth and their health to protect our freedom," Margaret explained during a community meeting about veteran services. "The least we can do is make sure they know how much their sacrifice means to families like ours." Harold's background as a high school teacher had proven equally valuable for helping Brotherhood Guard members develop the communication and leadership skills that could translate their military experience into civilian career success. His mentorship had helped 12 veterans complete college degrees and find meaningful employment that utilized their military training. Harold understands how to help warriors become teachers, leaders, and community builders, observed Tank Williams during one of their regular planning meetings. "He's shown us that protecting people doesn't end when we leave the military. It just takes different forms." The trust that Harold and Margaret had built with at-risk community members came from their authentic understanding of both vulnerability and protection, combined with their credible message that safety came from strong communities rather than individual isolation. If you've watched this far, say in the comments, what secret do you keep? Captain Derek Tank Williams had applied his Army Ranger training to developing a community security assessment program that identified potential threats and vulnerabilities before they could harm residents. His experience in urban warfare had taught him to recognize patterns and environmental factors that created dangerous situations for elderly and vulnerable community members. "We're not trying to replace local law enforcement," Tank explained during a presentation to the Texas Association of Chiefs of Police. "We're providing early warning systems and community education that help prevent crimes before they happen, especially crimes targeting senior citizens." The Community Protection Program had already identified and disrupted 3 other criminal enterprises that were targeting elderly residents for robbery, fraud, and abuse. Their success had attracted attention from law enforcement agencies throughout Texas who wanted to develop similar community-based protection programs. Tank's approach combined military intelligence gathering with community policing principles, creating sustainable protection networks that could operate effectively without ongoing government funding or bureaucratic oversight. Doc Anderson had established a mobile medical clinic that served elderly residents throughout rural Texas, using his Green Beret medical training and civilian healthcare experience to provide services in areas where traditional medical care was limited or unavailable. "We learned to provide combat medical care under impossible conditions overseas," Doc explained to medical students from UT Health, who had requested to observe his operations. "Now we're using those same skills to help elderly Americans who can't access regular healthcare services." The mobile clinic operated from a converted recreational vehicle that the Brotherhood Guard had purchased and equipped using donations from grateful community members. Doc's medical services were supplemented by other veterans who provided transportation, security, and practical support for elderly residents facing health emergencies. Harold and Margaret had become the clinic's unofficial coordinators, using their connections in the community to identify elderly residents who needed medical attention but couldn't afford traditional health care or transportation to medical facilities. Harold and Margaret understand the dignity and independence that elderly people want to maintain, Doc observed during one of his regular reports to the Brotherhood Guard leadership. "They help us provide medical care in ways that respect people's privacy and autonomy." If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you're listening to in the comments. Staff Sergeant Mike "Hawk" Patterson had developed a financial security program that protected elderly residents from the kind of financial fraud and exploitation that often targeted senior citizens with limited understanding of modern technology and banking practices. Criminals are increasingly using sophisticated financial scams to rob elderly people of their life savings, Hawke explained during a community education seminar at the Thompsons' church. Our program teaches seniors how to recognize and avoid these threats, while also providing investigative support when crimes occur. The financial protection program included educational workshops, technology training, and coordination with banking institutions to identify and prevent fraudulent transactions targeting elderly customers. Hawke's military intelligence background had proven invaluable for understanding and countering the criminal networks that operated these schemes. Harold had become the program's primary educator, using his teaching experience to explain complex financial concepts in ways that elderly residents could understand and remember. His credibility as a fellow senior citizen made his warnings more effective than traditional law enforcement presentations. "Harold speaks our language," observed program participant Dorothy Martinez, an 81-year-old widow who had nearly lost her savings to a telephone scam before Harold's education program taught her to recognize the warning signs. "When he tells us something is dangerous, we listen." Master Sergeant Tony Scout Martinez had channeled his Army intelligence expertise into developing an elder abuse investigation program that identified and prosecuted criminals who targeted elderly victims for various forms of exploitation and violence. Elder abuse is one of the fastest-growing crime categories in America, Scout explained during a presentation to the National Sheriff's Association. Our program combines military investigative techniques with civilian law enforcement to identify and stop these criminals before they can harm more victims. The investigation program had contributed to the prosecution of 47 individuals involved in various forms of elder abuse, including financial exploitation, physical assault, neglect, and fraud schemes specifically designed to target senior citizens. Margaret's nursing background had made her valuable for recognizing the signs of abuse and neglect that other people might miss, while her relationship with the Brotherhood Guard provided investigative resources that traditional social services often lacked. Margaret understands what normal aging looks like versus what abuse and neglect create, Scout reported during one of his case briefings. Her assessments have been crucial for identifying victims and gathering evidence against their abusers. If you've watched this far, say in the comments, what secret do you keep? The annual Harold and Margaret Day celebration had become one of Texas's largest community events, bringing together thousands of people whose lives had been touched by either the Thompsons' mentorship or the Brotherhood Guard's protective services. The event commemorated not just their rescue from the MMA fighters, but the ongoing work that had grown from that terrifying afternoon. 6 months ago, 3 criminals nearly destroyed our lives, Harold addressed the massive crowd during the anniversary celebration. Today, the brotherhood that saved us has created opportunities and protection for thousands of elderly people throughout Texas. The celebration included success story presentations from elderly residents who had been protected from various threats, families who had benefited from the scholarship programs, and community members who had become volunteers in various protective services. 78-year-old Robert Chen took the microphone to share his experience. 2 months ago, criminals were trying to steal my house through a fake mortgage scam. Harold's financial protection program taught me to recognize the fraud, and the Brotherhood Guard investigators helped the police arrest the people responsible. Robert's transformation from potential fraud victim to community advocate embodied everything that Harold, Margaret, and the Brotherhood Guard were working to achieve through their intergenerational protection programs. The community that had formed around the Thompsons' rescue represented something unprecedented in veteran social services, a sustainable collaboration between elderly civilians, military veterans, law enforcement agencies, and community organizations that had created measurable improvements in safety, health, and economic security for vulnerable populations. Local grocery store owner David Park, who operated the market where the original rescue had occurred, spoke about the practical impact of their community protection efforts. "My store used to be hit by criminals targeting elderly customers at least once a month," he testified during a city council hearing about community safety. "I haven't had a single incident in 6 months because everyone knows the Brotherhood Guard is watching." The economic revitalization of the area around the Thompsons' neighborhood demonstrated the connection between safety and prosperity. Property values had increased by 32%, new senior-friendly businesses had opened, and crime rates had dropped by 58% as protection programs created environments where elderly residents could live safely. If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you are listening to in the comments. 1 year after their rescue, Harold and Margaret Thompson had been appointed to the Texas Commission on Aging, where their programs and philosophy were being implemented throughout the state. The former teacher and nurse who had once been victims of criminal violence were now advising government agencies on community-based solutions to problems that had plagued elderly populations for generations. The commission appointment represented official recognition of their expertise and the effectiveness of their community-centered approach to elder protection. But for the Thompsons personally, it represented an opportunity to scale up the lessons they had learned from the Brotherhood Guard and apply them to help elderly families throughout the region. Harold and Margaret have demonstrated that sustainable elder protection requires community engagement, not just institutional services, commented Dr. Robert Williams, the Commission's chair. Their programs show how veterans and seniors can work together to create environments where aging Americans can maintain dignity, independence, and security. The Brotherhood Guard's community protection model had been adopted by veteran organizations in 12 states, creating a network of volunteer emergency responders who understood that true protection meant building strong communities rather than simply reacting to crimes after they occurred. The Thompsons' role on the commission required them to spend significant time in government meetings and policy discussions, but they insisted on maintaining direct contact with elderly community members through regular visits to senior centers, community meetings, and individual homes. "We can't advocate for programs we don't personally implement," Margaret explained to fellow commission members. "Policymakers need to understand not just what works in theory, but what actually changes lives in practice." Their dual role as policy advisors and direct service providers created unique insights that influenced statewide initiatives. The Thompsons' recommendations were based on documented results from their own programs rather than academic theories or political considerations. The Commission's annual report highlighted the Thompsons' work as the most effective elder protection program in Texas, noting that communities served by Brotherhood Guard-affiliated programs showed 70% lower rates of elder abuse and 85% higher rates of successful aging in place. But statistics only told part of the story. The real measure of their impact was visible in individual lives that had been transformed through protection, support, and the kind of intergenerational relationships that honored both military service and civilian wisdom. If you've watched this far, say in the comments, what secret do you keep? 84-year-old Maria Santos stood before the commission to share her experience. 3 years ago, I was being threatened by my own grandson, who wanted to steal my house and force me into a nursing home, she testified. Harold and Margaret's protection program connected me with veterans who stopped the abuse and helped me get legal protection. Now I'm safe in my own home with people who truly care about my welfare. Maria's transformation from abuse victim to protected community member embodied the long-term impact that the Thompsons' programs achieved through sustained relationship building and comprehensive support systems. 2 years after 26 motorcycles had surrounded 3 MMA fighters in a grocery store parking lot, the ripple effects of that rescue continued to spread throughout Texas and beyond. The Thompsons' model of intergenerational community protection had been implemented in over 40 cities, creating a network of programs that had helped thousands of elderly residents avoid crime, fraud, abuse, and neglect. The Brotherhood Guard had grown to over 400 active members across 6 states, with chapters providing emergency response, community protection, educational support, and family assistance services. Their annual budget, funded entirely through donations and volunteer labor, exceeded that of many government elder services agencies. The Thompsons' influence extended beyond direct service delivery to fundamental changes in how communities understood the relationship between military veterans and civilian elders. Their programs demonstrated that sustainable protection required addressing both vulnerability and strength, both individual safety and collective well-being. Harold and Margaret taught us that every veteran saved from isolation and every elder saved from victimization has the potential to save others, Steele reflected during his transition ceremony as he prepared to hand leadership to the next generation. The couple we rescued that day has rescued thousands of others through the programs they've created. The ceremony brought together over 6,000 people whose lives had been touched by either the Thompsons' direct intervention or the broader network of protection that had grown from their rescue. The event included testimonials from elderly adults who had avoided becoming victims, veterans who had found purpose through service, and community members who had discovered the power of intergenerational cooperation. Margaret, now 71 years old and serving as the Brotherhood Guard's Director of Community Relations, had been chosen to deliver the keynote address at Steele's retirement ceremony. Her transformation from frightened victim to community leader represented the kind of growth that effective protection could inspire. "Steele and the Brotherhood Guard saved our lives," Margaret said during the ceremony. "Now it's our responsibility to make sure we continue saving lives, not just through emergency response, but through building communities where emergencies become less likely because people look out for each other." If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you are listening to in the comments. 5 years after their rescue from MMA fighters, Dr. Harold and Dr. Margaret Thompson, they had been awarded honorary doctorates in community service from Texas A&M University, were serving as consultants for the National Elder Protection Initiative, sharing the Brotherhood Guard model with community organizations, law enforcement agencies, and government officials throughout the United States. The lesson we learned that day wasn't just that help exists when you call for it, Harold told audiences at the National Conference on Aging. The lesson was that everyone has the capacity to become someone else's help, someone else's protection, someone else's reason to believe that good exists in the world. The conference presentation highlighted 5 years of documented results from Brotherhood Guard-affiliated programs, over 20,000 elderly residents protected from various forms of victimization, 6,000 veterans engaged in meaningful community service, 12,000 families supported through crisis situations, and measurable improvements in community safety across dozens of neighborhoods. But the Thompsons' presentation focused less on statistics than on stories, individual transformations that demonstrated the human impact of sustained intergenerational protection efforts. They told the story of Robert Chen, who had become a financial fraud educator after being protected from scammers. They shared the journey of Maria Santos, who had become an elder rights advocate after escaping family abuse. "These aren't just success stories," Margaret explained to the national audience. "These are demonstration projects showing what becomes possible when communities choose to invest in protection rather than punishment, in relationship building rather than isolation." The national attention had led to requests for technical assistance from organizations in Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, and Japan, countries where aging populations were facing similar challenges with crime, fraud, and social isolation affecting elderly residents. The Brotherhood Guard's training manual had been translated into 8 languages and adapted for different cultural contexts, but the core principles remained consistent: authentic long-term commitment, integration of emergency response with community development, and leadership development that created sustainability beyond individual personalities. The Thompsons' role as international consultants required extensive travel, but they maintained their hands-on involvement with local programs through video conferences and regular site visits. Their continued connection to direct service delivery ensured that policy recommendations remained grounded in practical experience. If you've watched this far, say in the comments, what secret do you keep? The global network of Brotherhood Guard-inspired programs now included chapters in 18 countries, creating an international community of veteran organizations committed to elder protection through service rather than institutional care through bureaucracy. The mainstream media had eventually discovered the Thompsons' story, but only after it had already inspired a movement that transformed how communities approached the intersection of aging populations and public safety. Local news coverage had mentioned successful community protection coordination, but the veteran organization that had provided the actual rescue capability had remained largely unknown to broader audiences until their success became too significant to ignore. "Why doesn't the media tell these stories more often?" Margaret asked Steele during one of their regular conversations about current events and social responsibility. "Because the media focuses on conflict and failure," Steele replied thoughtfully. "Stories about veterans serving their communities and elders finding strength through support don't fit the narrative that gets attention. They prefer to show aging as decline, and veterans as problems, not solutions. But for the thousands of families who had been helped by Brotherhood Guard programs, media recognition was irrelevant compared to the practical reality that someone cared enough to respond when they needed assistance. The legacy of that afternoon, when 26 bikers had heard elderly people calling for help and responded without hesitation, lived on in every community service activity, every protection program, every mentorship relationship, and every act of intergenerational cooperation that demonstrated the enduring values of military service applied to civilian needs. 10 years after the rescue, Dr. Harold and Dr. Margaret Thompson were serving as senior advisors for the National Veterans Community Service Network, while maintaining their roles as honorary members of the Brotherhood Guard Board of Directors. The couple, who had been saved from MMA fighters, were now responsible for coordinating protection programs in communities where thousands of families had benefited from the model that grew from their own rescue. The 26 bikers who had run toward danger when others ran away had created a legacy that extended far beyond their own lives. They had proven that courage doesn't diminish with civilian transition, that military training serves peacetime purposes, and that some battles, the battles to protect innocent people, never truly end. Steele Rodriguez's final interview, given shortly before his complete retirement from active leadership, summarized everything the Brotherhood Guard had accomplished. "We saved 2 elderly people from criminals 10 years ago. What we discovered is that saving people creates opportunities to save thousands more. The Brotherhood never ends. It just keeps growing to include everyone who needs protection." The MMA fighters who had threatened Harold and Margaret 10 years earlier had served their prison sentences and been released, but the protection that had surrounded the elderly couple that day lived on in every program they had created, every veteran they had mentored, every elderly resident who had found safety through community support, and every intergenerational relationship that proved ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they chose to protect others instead of protecting only themselves. The media had initially ignored this story, but the truth had spread through more powerful channels, through changed lives, transformed communities, and the quiet knowledge that sometimes angels wear leather, ride motorcycles, and prove that the strongest people are those who use their strength to protect those who need protection, rather than those who can provide something in return.